In 1948, a young man named Herbert walked into the White Way Cafe in Waynesboro, Georgia, and saw a 16-year-old girl named Frances moving back and forth behind the counter. He kept coming back, not because the coffee was particularly good, because she was there. He watched her go in and out for weeks before he got up the nerve to ask her out. Their first date was at the movies. 1 year later, he asked her if she would have him as her husband. "Of course," she said. The wedding almost didn't happen. Herbert was an hour late to the church. The preacher nearly refused to marry them. Frances, already in her dress, already nervous, thought the whole thing might fall apart before it began. It didn't. The preacher rushed through the service, and Herbert and Frances Delaigle walked out of that church married. They stayed that way for 71 years. They held hands for most of those years, a habit that started during Herbert's time in the military, when he was gone for long stretches, and Frances learned to reach for his hand the moment he came back. "When he's home," she said, "I always got his hand." When Herbert died in July of 2019, Frances died exactly 12 hours later. Same day, same time of night. He went at 2:20 in the morning. She followed at 2:20 in the afternoon. Their 6 children called it an amazing love story. They were right. But what made it amazing was not the ending. It was the 71 years of ordinary days that came before it. The habits practiced so consistently, they became invisible. The small decisions, made before breakfast, that most couples never think to make at all. Number 7 on this list is the habit Frances described without naming it, the one that held them together through the years Herbert was away. Number 14 is what Herbert said was the secret, in 4 words, on their 70th anniversary. And number 1 is what every couple on this list had in common, whether they lived in Georgia or Tennessee or rural Ohio, and what almost no one talks about anymore. These are the 20 forgotten ways American couples stayed married, and what we stopped doing without ever deciding to stop. Before we go further, hit that subscribe button. What you're about to hear has been sitting in diaries, church records, and kitchen table conversations for 70 years. It's time someone said it out loud. Number 20. They ate at the same table every night. A farm wife in rural Georgia set her table at 6 o'clock every evening for 31 years. Not when her husband arrived, at 6 o'clock. He arranged his day around the table, not the other way around. This was not about food. That table was where the day finally got explained, where a husband's silence had a reason and a wife's worry had a name. Over time, that hour became the load-bearing wall of the marriage. Each person arrived carrying something the other couldn't see yet. By the time the plates were cleared, they had traded it. When television moved into American living rooms in the early 1950s, the first thing it displaced was not leisure time. It was the dinner table. Not immediately, gradually. Families began eating in shifts, then in front of the screen, then separately. A 1967 survey found that the average American family shared a sit-down meal together fewer than 3 times a week. Today, that number is below 1. The table didn't disappear. The decision to treat it as sacred did. Number 19. They said goodbye like it meant something. A coal miner's wife in eastern Kentucky kissed her husband at the door every morning for 42 years. Not a glance, not a pat on the arm. She stopped what she was doing, walked to the door, and kissed him. He never left without it. She started the habit the first week of their marriage, after her own mother told her, "You never know which goodbye is the last one." In the coal country of eastern Kentucky, that was less metaphor and more arithmetic. What the habit actually built, beyond the obvious, was a daily rhythm of departure and return. He left. She noticed. Yeah, he came back, She noticed again. Over 42 years, that noticing accumulated into something that looked, from the outside, like an unusually close marriage. Frances Delaigle understood this without being taught it. During the years Herbert served, every departure carried weight. So every return did too. The hand she reached for the moment he walked back through the door was not sentiment. It was memory. A reminder of every time he had come back when he might not have. Most couples today leave through different doors at different times, headphones in, phones up. The departure goes unmarked, so does the return, and without anyone deciding anything, the marriage loses its pulse. Number 18. They never criticized each other in public. A pastor's wife in Alabama was asked once, at a church dinner, why she never corrected her husband in front of others, even when he got a story wrong, even when she clearly disagreed. She considered the question for a moment. "He has to walk back into this room after I answer," she said. "I'm not going to make that harder." This was not performance. It was protection. Couples of that generation understood that a marriage has a public face, and that face is built one comment at a time. Every eye roll in front of company, every small correction at the dinner table, every joke told at a spouse's expense removes something. Small enough that no single instance gets noticed. Enough, over years, to leave nothing standing. It was also a decision about loyalty, not to hold your spouse's dignity in public, even when privately you'd argue the point to the wall, is to say, whatever we are to each other behind closed doors, out here, we are one thing. Number 17. They kept their arguments inside the house. A furniture maker in North Carolina told his son on the morning of his wedding, "Whatever happens between you and your wife stays between you and your wife. Not your mother, not your brother, not the man you have lunch with on Fridays." This was not about hiding problems. It was about protecting the only place where problems could actually be solved. The moment a third person enters a marriage argument, even as a listener, even with good intentions, the argument stops being between two people. It becomes a case being built. Positions firm up. Compromise gets harder. A disagreement becomes a grievance with witnesses. Couples who aired their conflicts to friends and family in the 1940s were considered, quietly, to have poor judgment. The marriage was a private structure. Its cracks were private business. Today, the average person in a troubled marriage has told the details of their last argument to at least 4 people before the argument is finished. Each telling makes retreat harder. Each listener adds weight to one side of a scale that was never meant to have sides. The furniture maker was married for 47 years. His son is still married today. Number 16. They touched each other every day on purpose. Frances Delaigle said it plainly, in the way people say things they have practiced for so long they no longer think about them. "When he's home, I always got his hand." Not occasionally. Not when the mood was right. Always. What that habit built over 71 years was a baseline of presence, a running signal between two people that said, "I still see you. I still choose you. We are still the same thing we were." A hand reached for, without reason, is not a small thing. Over decades, it becomes the thing. A woman in Mississippi, whose husband worked long shifts at the mill, had her own version of this. Every time she walked past him in the house, she put her hand on his shoulder, just for a second. He did the same. Neither could have told you when it started. It was simply what they did, until the day it wasn't possible anymore, and the house felt different in a way that had nothing to do with the square footage. The habit cost nothing. It required no conversation, no planning, no difficult decision. Just the willingness, again and again, to notice that the other person was still there. Number 15. They protected each other's sleep. A railroad worker in Missouri came home at odd hours, sometimes midnight, sometimes before dawn. His wife had learned in the first year of their marriage to leave a plate on the stove and say nothing until morning. He had learned to move through the house in the dark without waking her. They had developed, without discussing it, a mutual policy. Your rest is my responsibility too. This sounds small until you understand what chronic sleep deprivation does to a person's emotional range. A husband running on 5 broken hours of sleep does not have access to the version of himself that is patient, that is generous, that can hear a difficult thing without reacting badly. Neither does a wife. The research on this did not exist in 1948. The instinct did. Couples of that generation treated a spouse's sleep the way they treated a spouse's health, as something to be guarded, not casually interrupted. Arguments that started after 10 o'clock were suspect. Difficult conversations were saved for daylight. The night was not the place for hard things. Number 14. They made the marriage more important than being right. On their 70th anniversary, a reporter asked Herbert Delaigle what the secret to a long marriage was. He didn't hesitate. "Show your love," he said. 4 words, no qualifications, no conditions attached. What Herbert understood, and what Frances confirmed when she added, "be there for each other," was that the marriages that last are not the ones where both people always feel loving. That they are the ones where both people keep choosing to act like it, even on the days the feeling has gone quiet. A woman in Tennessee, the week before her wedding, received one piece of advice from her mother. Not about love, not about faith, not about the responsibilities of a wife. One thing: there will be a moment in every argument when you know you're right and he's wrong, and you can prove it. And you'll have to decide whether you want to be right or whether you want to go to sleep next to somebody who still feels good about himself. She said she thought about that sentence at least once a week for 50 years. What her mother understood was that the need to win an argument is not a character flaw. It's a reflex. And like most reflexes, it operates faster than judgment. The couples who stayed married for decades were not couples who never disagreed. They were couples who had developed a pause, a half-second of space between the reflex and the response, long enough to ask, "What do I actually want from this moment?" Most of the time, the answer was not to win. Number 13. They built rituals that belonged only to them. A couple in rural Virginia had a ritual for 38 years that their children called strange. Every Sunday evening, after supper, they sat on the back porch with 2 cups of coffee and talked about one good thing that had happened that week. Not problems, not plans. One good thing each. The rule, only good things, was not naivety. It was engineering. 6 days of ordinary life produce enough friction, enough fatigue, enough small disappointments to quietly shift a couple's baseline toward negative. The Sunday ritual was a deliberate correction, a weekly reminder that the life they had built together still contained things worth naming. The rituals that lasted were always specific. Not "we spend time together," but "this porch, these cups, this rule, this hour." The specificity is what made them hold. A vague intention dissolves the first week something else comes up. A specific ritual has gravity. Herbert and Frances had their own version of this. It wasn't a porch or a particular evening. It was the hand, the reaching. The same gesture, repeated across 71 years, until it became the ritual itself. The thing that said, without words, that whatever the week had been, they were still in it together. Number 12. They spoke well of each other when the other wasn't there. A woman in South Carolina was known in her church circle for one habit that other women noticed and rarely named. When her husband's name came up in conversation, any conversation, whether he'd done something right or something frustrating, she found something true and good to say about him. Always. Not performance, not pretense. She had made a decision, early in the marriage, that how she spoke about him when he wasn't in the room was part of how she felt about him when he was. The two could not be separated. This operates in both directions. Couples who habitually speak poorly of each other in private company are not relieving pressure. They are building a case. Each complaint, each story told for laughs at a spouse's expense, adds another stone to a structure that eventually becomes the way they see each other. The marriage narrows to fit the story being told about it. The opposite is also true. She spoke well of him. Over time, she saw him through the words she had used. Number 11. They went to church together. This one will mean different things to different people. But set aside the theology for a moment and look at the structure. A couple in rural Ohio attended the same church for 41 years. Every Sunday, they sat in the same pew, sang the same hymns, heard the same calendar of Scripture move through the same seasons year after year. They prayed beside each other for things they wanted and things they feared and things they had no words for yet. What that practice built was a shared orientation, not just shared beliefs, shared posture. The two people who kneel in the same direction, week after week, develop a common language for the things that cannot be negotiated: mortality, meaning, what a life is supposed to add up to. The marriage had an anchor outside the marriage. When the two of them pulled against each other, there was something larger they were both still pointed toward. Without it, many couples discover too late that they have been building in different directions all along. In 1953, a sociologist at the University of Chicago named Ernest Burgess completed a 15-year study tracking over 1,000 married couples across the American Midwest. His team interviewed them at the start of their marriages and followed up at 5-year intervals. The couples who stayed married and reported genuine satisfaction shared a cluster of behaviors so consistent that Burgess called them the invisible infrastructure of durable marriages. None of the behaviors were dramatic. None required money, education, or unusual circumstances. They were small daily habits, practiced with enough consistency that they became invisible, indistinguishable from personality. The couples who divorced, or who stayed married in what Burgess called empty shell marriages, had largely abandoned those same habits within the first 7 years. Not all at once. Gradually. One ritual dropped during a busy season and never recovered. One habit replaced by a convenience that felt harmless. The study was presented at a conference in 1954, cited in 2 academic journals, and never entered the public conversation. The habits Burgess documented look almost exactly like this list. Number 10. They forgave on purpose. A minister's wife in Georgia put it this way to a younger woman asking for marriage advice: "Forgiveness is not a feeling. It is a decision you make in the morning before the feeling catches up." Her husband had done something early in their marriage that she did not specify and did not need to. The point was what came after. She had decided, not felt, decided, to stay and to release it. The feeling followed, she said, about 6 months later. What couples of that generation understood about forgiveness is that it is not primarily an act of generosity toward the other person. It is an act of self-preservation. A marriage that carries unresolved injury from one decade into the next is not a marriage that has survived. It is a marriage that has been haunted. The couple still living inside it has been living with a ghost. The decision to forgive, made once, remade on the mornings when it slips, is the decision to refuse the haunting. Number 9. They never threatened to leave. A woman in East Texas, married 46 years, was asked by her granddaughter what the secret was. She thought about it for longer than the granddaughter expected. "We never said it," she said finally, "even when we thought it." She meant the word leave, the threat. The door held open as a weapon in an argument. She and her husband had made an unspoken agreement, sometime in the first year of the marriage, that the permanence of what they had built was not available as leverage. Not ever. Not in the worst fights. Not at 2 in the morning when things felt irreparable. This is not a small thing. The moment I could leave enters a marriage, even once, even half meant, even walked back the next day. Something changes. The other person has seen the door. They know it opens. From that point forward, some portion of their energy goes not into the marriage, but into managing the possibility of its ending. Trust does not break all at once. It develops a crack, and the crack is always there after. The couples who stayed married treated permanence not as a feeling, but as a boundary. The marriage was the ground they stood on. You do not threaten to remove the ground. Number 8. They handled money as a team. A hardware store owner in Indiana and his wife sat at the kitchen table every first Sunday of the month with a ledger, 2 cups of coffee, and 1 hour. They went through every dollar that had come in and every dollar that had gone out. Together. No surprises, no separate accounts, no purchases the other didn't know about. This was standard practice for most married couples through the 1950s, not because financial transparency was a therapeutic concept anyone had named, but because the money was genuinely shared. It came from one source. It went to one life. Hiding any part of it would have felt like hiding part of the marriage. What the monthly table actually provided, beyond the accounting, was a monthly moment of shared reality. This is what we have. This is what we owe. This is where we are. A couple that sits inside the same facts every month cannot drift too far apart from each other's actual lives. Financial infidelity. The term didn't exist in 1952, but the behavior did. And it was considered a serious breach, not primarily because of the money, because of what the hiding meant about the marriage underneath. Number 7. They chose each other again after hard seasons. Herbert Delaigle was gone for long stretches during his military service. Frances didn't know, on some of those nights in Waynesboro, when he would be back. Or if. What she did was reach for his hand the moment he walked through the door. Every time. Not because the years apart had been easy, because they hadn't. The reaching was the choice, made again, on that particular afternoon, after that particular absence, in that particular kitchen in Georgia. This is what the couples who survived hard seasons understood that the ones who didn't often missed. Staying married through difficulty is not a passive condition, or it is an active decision made at the exact moment when making it is hardest. A couple in rural Tennessee lost a child in the early 1950s. A boy, 7 years old. 3 days after a fever the doctor had called manageable. Grief does not arrive the same way in 2 people at the same time, and a couple that cannot find each other inside their separate griefs can spend years in the same house becoming strangers. Research on bereaved couples consistently shows significant marital deterioration following the loss of a child. Many marriages do not survive it. This one did. Their youngest daughter, who was 4 when her brother died, said she remembered one thing from that period. Every evening, her father would find her mother wherever she was in the house and just stand near her, not talking, not fixing anything, just near. He couldn't reach her grief. He stayed close to her anyway. Over time, close was enough. The choice to stay present to a spouse during a season when connection feels impossible is not romantic. It doesn't feel like love when you're inside it. It feels like stubbornness. Most of the marriages that lasted were built on exactly that. Two people too stubborn to stop standing near each other until the season changed. Number 6. They kept their friendship alive. A couple in rural Pennsylvania, married 39 years, were asked separately what they would miss most if the other died. Both gave the same answer, in different words. Not the partnership, not the history, the company. They liked each other. Well, that sounds obvious until you look at how many long marriages run on obligation and habit, with the actual friendship quietly gone, dissolved sometime in the years of raising children and managing a household and surviving the things that needed surviving. Friendship inside a marriage requires some of the same maintenance as friendship outside it. Genuine curiosity about the other person's inner life. The willingness to be interested in what interests them, even when it doesn't interest you. Conversations that are not about logistics. The occasional choice to spend time together that serves no function except that you want to. Frances said Herbert always kept her laughing. Not occasionally. Always. Across 71 years of ordinary life, through the military absences, through raising 6 children, is through the slow quiet of old age, he kept finding ways to make her laugh. That is not a personality trait. That is a decision, made again and again, to remain the kind of person your spouse still enjoys being around. Couples of that generation often had less time and fewer options than couples today. They also wasted less of what they had. Number 5. They protected the marriage from their own families. A man in Louisiana described his mother-in-law as a woman who had opinions about everything and the confidence to share all of them. His wife, he said, was the one who managed it. When her mother pushed too far into their decisions, their finances, their parenting, the way they kept their house, his wife said, simply and without drama, "That's between me and my husband," every time. This required something most people find difficult: choosing a spouse over a parent. Not in hatred, not in rupture, but in the quiet daily work of keeping the marriage the primary relationship. The couples who did this well understood something that sounds severe until you watch a marriage slowly dismantled by a mother's running commentary or a father's persistent interference. The marriage is a new thing. It requires its own walls. She loved her mother. She loved her husband more. She made sure her mother knew which was which. Number 4. They prayed together. A deacon in rural Arkansas and his wife prayed together every night of their married life. Not a long prayer, not a formal one. 30 seconds, sometimes less. His hand on hers. A few words said out loud about the day just ended and the one coming. What that practice built, over 40 years, was a nightly moment of shared vulnerability. To pray beside someone is to let them hear what you actually want, what you're actually afraid of, what you're not sure you can carry alone. It is difficult to remain distant from a person you have heard pray. It is difficult to hold a grudge against someone whose fears you know by heart. Their daughter, who grew up watching this, said she thought of it as a daily reset. Whatever the day had been, tense, distant, unresolved, those 30 seconds before sleep acknowledged something larger than the argument, larger than the grievance, larger than the specific failure of that specific Tuesday. It did not erase the hard things. It put them in proportion. Couples today are more comfortable sharing a streaming account than a prayer. The intimacy required for one is not the same as the intimacy required for the other. Before the next habit, I want to pause for a moment. Everything on this list, the table, the goodbye at the door, the hand reached for without reason, these were not things Herbert and Frances invented. They were things they inherited from their faith, from Scripture that had already been telling married people the same things for 2,000 years. If what you've been hearing today has felt true to you, if some part of you recognized these habits not as new ideas, but as things you already knew and may have drifted from, I put something together for you. It's called 12 Biblical Rules for a Marriage That Lasts. 12 principles, each one rooted in Scripture, each one practiced by the couples this channel is built around. And beside each principle were one simple exercise, something you can do this week. Not a course, not a program. A short guide, intentionally short, for couples who still believe a marriage is worth building one faithful choice at a time. The link is in the pinned comment below. If today's video meant something to you, I think this will too. Number 3. They apologized without conditions. A woman in Mississippi learned the difference between an apology and a negotiation from her own mother, who had learned it from hers. The rule, passed down like a recipe. When you apologize for what you did. Not for how the other person took it. Not for how things got out of hand. For what you did. Full stop. The conditional apology. I'm sorry you felt that way. I'm sorry things got so heated. I'm sorry, but you have to understand. Is not an apology. It is an argument wearing an apology's clothes. The person receiving it knows the difference immediately, even if they can't name it. The knowing accumulates over years into a specific kind of loneliness, the sense that you have never quite been seen clearly enough to be genuinely apologized to. The women in her family were not sentimental about this. They were precise. Say what you did. Say you're sorry. Stop talking. Her marriage lasted 51 years. She said the apologies were the reason. Number 2. They chose every morning to stay. A retired schoolteacher in North Carolina said something that stopped the room at her granddaughter's bridal shower. Someone had asked her, the way people ask elderly couples at bridal showers, expecting something warm and quotable, what the secret to a long marriage was. Now she set down her cup and said, "It's not a feeling. It's a decision you make before breakfast." She had been married 53 years. There had been seasons, she said, when she had not felt in love. When the feeling was entirely gone, and she had looked across the breakfast table at a man she had chosen and felt, honestly, very little. And she had made the decision anyway. Not to perform love she didn't feel. To behave like someone who had chosen this person, and to trust that the feeling would follow the behavior. It did. Not immediately. Not dramatically. The way warmth returns to a hand held over a fire. Gradually, then all at once. What her generation understood, and what the modern conversation about marriage has largely abandoned, is the distinction between love as a condition and love as a practice. As a condition arrives and departs on its own schedule. A practice is something you show up to. The couples who lasted were not the ones who always felt it. They were the ones who kept showing up on the mornings they didn't. The decision made before breakfast, every morning, 53 years of mornings. Number 1. They never stopped being the person the other one married. On their 70th anniversary, Frances Delaigle was asked what she loved most about Herbert after all those years. She didn't talk about the grand gestures. She didn't mention the anniversaries or the milestones or the moments that would make sense in a speech. She talked about the ordinary thing, the way he had always been patient, always been good-hearted, always found a way to make her laugh. Not in the beginning, when it was easy, all the way through. What Herbert had done across 70 years was remain recognizable. The young man who stood outside the White Way Cafe, working up the nerve to ask her out, curious, a little nervous, determined to make her smile, was still present somewhere inside the man sitting beside her at 92. She could still find him in there. This is what quietly ends more marriages than conflict ever does. Not a single rupture, but a slow disappearance. A person spends 20 years being responsible and needed and useful, and one morning their spouse looks across the table and realizes they are not sure who is sitting there anymore. Not the person they chose. Someone competent and familiar and essentially a stranger. The couples who avoided this had, in various ways, kept returning to each other as people, not just as partners. They asked questions they didn't already know the answers to. They noticed changes and said so. They remained, in some essential way, genuinely interested in the specific human being they had married, not just the role that human being performed. It requires almost nothing. It is almost never done. Herbert Delaigle died on a July morning in 2019. He was 93 years old. Frances died 12 hours later at 2:20 in the afternoon. The same numbers on the clock, just the other side of the day. Their 6 children said it was amazing how they had been together for 71 years and were now together in heaven. It is amazing. But the part that deserves more attention is not the ending. It is the Tuesday mornings, the plate left on the stove, the hand reached for without reason, the preacher who almost refused to marry them because Herbert was an hour late, and the woman in her dress who waited anyway because she had already decided. 71 years of small decisions made before breakfast, made at the door, made in the dark when nobody was watching. None of what Herbert and Frances practiced appears in any marriage manual. None of it required a therapist, a retreat, an app, or a framework. It required only what they had, the daily decision, made quietly and without ceremony, to treat the marriage as the most important thing in the room. Not the loudest, not the most urgent, the most important. What their generation knew, and what we have spent 50 years being talked out of knowing, is that a marriage is not a feeling you sustain. It is a practice you protect. Day after day, so ordinary day after ordinary day, until the day one of you is gone and the other follows 12 hours later, because 71 years was not enough time, and the only thing left to do was go. The habits are still available. They always were. Herbert said it in 4 words on their 70th anniversary. Show your love. Frances added 3 more. Be there for each other. That's the whole list. Everything else is just practice.